help you get the exercises done and kind of get the point of the whole course and what we're trying to teach here. Good. And here's a reminder where we are. 1 done, 5 to go. And today we're talking about organizational transformations, kind of crash course into that and what does it mean, a couple of examples and so forth. But before that, actually, let's look into the first exercise that you did last 2 weeks. And a little bit reflections and thoughts about that. First, kind of administrative notes. Please return the reflections, not the drawings. Remember the thing, and this will be all the exercises. We will ask you to do an exercise, which is mostly drawing and talking, and then add the reflections. What did you learn about it? What did you think about it with your pair? That's actually the point of the exercise, not you drawing diagrams, it's the reflections. So this was the first exercise. So now pay attention, please. Now it's time to pay attention. If you did not return reflections, return them by next Tuesday. Please do that. After next Tuesday, if you haven't returned the reflections, then you will not have exercise number 1 marked. So 1 week extra time. If you didn't return reflections, you know who you are, then return them. After next Tuesday, we're going to keep score and see who did the exercise or not. The reflections are the point. Remember, and then when you reflect, don't reflect on the tool. Oh, please do reflect on the tool. How did the tool work? What was the limitations? And I'm saying many of you did this exactly. So we're talking about, 1/5 or 1/6 of you who somehow forgot to do this. And then a practical thing, when you return these, add the other person's name as well. So it's kind of like, if it was me and Jari doing the exercise, I would submit the exercise and say, this is me and Jari's exercise, not that this is my exercise. And Jari would return Jari. So, just makes easy the bookkeeping who has done and what. Good. And then remember this, and this is my next point coming soon. The point about the tools is to facilitate others. The tools themselves are not the magic. The tools just hopefully show you something more interesting. So let's see how it went with this week. Here are a few, I think, good points from your reflections. So one of you wrote, understanding about the onion tool, understanding the message in the change may need to be modified or fine-tuned depending on the level of context in the onion layer to make the message clear. Excellent point. Excellent. Exactly. Just drawing these circles and having a discussion. Just kind of, okay, for these different audiences, I need to fine-tune my message. I need to, they probably have different perspectives. Second point, the tool helps you understand what interpersonal linkages there are. What impacts does things have and who affects the success of some organizational change. Yet again, another great insight about this simple tool. Third, and this is a really important one, I'm coming back to this, that people working in large corporations, or I would say large organizations in general, probably benefit from this quite a lot. Because there is this human tendency to become siloed and we live in our little bubbles. But once you kind of start discussing and having discussions, what are the other bubbles? How are they interconnected? Probably refreshes your thinking quite a lot. And the last one I liked a lot. This exercise helps a facilitator to initiate a powerful change by simply knowing your starting point. Helps plan an intervention better once you have the full picture. Exactly. So if you are having your facilitator hat on, you need to start somewhere with an individual person or another individual. You can start asking them to draw this diagram. And then you can see where the intervention probably has to happen. What works best. And as a great example, I hope Christoph and Artem are there somewhere listening. Great job. Just to show others that it's as simple as this. We don't need to have 10, but Christoph and Artem are awesome, so they did 10. And I really circled one of them, which is number 8. And they wrote that what we have noticed while doing the exercise is that the process of understanding the context should be done in iterations, but not in a waterfall. So to keep the concept effective, it is wise to continually reassess the context to remain effective to facilitate change. In other words, what a brilliant point, that you should probably do this once, but over again. The more you learn, circumstances change, and that's why this simple tool is powerful. You can just pop up a paper and pen and start drawing and doing iteratively. Hey, last time we met, this is what it looked like. Does it look like this now? And having the discussions. So just wanted to give there were other excellent ones as well. Picked up this one from Christoph and Artem as a great example of how just, do it like this. That's not much to ask. And I really kind of the point of the tool from 2 weeks ago. This is actually from the same course a couple of years ago. Somebody pointed out that this is like the proverb of the cathedral builders. That, refers to the classic example of stone layers. When you're asking somebody, what's your job? What are they doing? Then one says that I'm laying bricks. Then you go to the other person who seems to be doing exactly the same job, but that person says, well, actually, I'm building a cathedral. Yeah, how insightful. Already in medieval times, they understood that. You should probably understand the context of what you're building. Gives you purpose, meaningfulness, understands your success better, and so on. So that's a great point. I keep on having this slide over here with this. However, people had also some questions. You could even say some critical questions about this exercise, which is great. Here we go. So few of you wrote, or some of you wrote, first of all, a little bit difficult to think of the specific way to draw the onion layers. Yeah, where do I do? How many layers? What do I mean? All that. A second comment, quite similar. It was a bit difficult to understand what to do with the onion. What's the point of this? Yeah, they can force us to do exercises. They are the teachers, but hey, how does it fit my life? Third one, it's difficult to see all the advantages of this exercise since the levels that actually are difficult to portray and visualize are missing. So the onion is too simple. It doesn't have all the complexities and, maybe it should be a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional onion. Maybe it should not be an onion at all. Maybe it should be another vegetable. Fourth comment, the onion is so simple and hard to add. It's so simple, it's hard to add context. So the onion was actually limiting. Good, because truth to be told, this was kind of the point we were looking. Because then it brings the second point. Remember, maybe the tool is not the thing. That's kind of the point of a simple tool, is that it is limited. It is a simplification. It is not perfect. But remember, like I said, the tool is not the magic spell. This is not a Harry Potter story where we give you a magic spell and magic happens. No, we give you extremely simple tools, and then when you start using them, you're like, hey, I don't understand this. Hey, this limits my wealth. This is missing this and this dimension. And now here's the point. When the tool felt limited, where were the limits? What was missing? Why is reality not as simple as this onion tool? And if and when you had these conversations with your pair, that's the point. That's exactly the point. You have this limited tool, and that's why the conversations are the point. Because the real world is way too complex for a simple tool like this. So it's not the problem of the tool. It's more like the tool just shows you that, hey, actually our organization is way more complex. Or actually, why am I doing this? What's the purpose of this tool? And these are exactly the questions we wanted you to come up and kind of come to your mind in the first exercise. Why am I doing this? What's the purpose of this? What kind of simplifications I'm going to do because I need to simplify, and so forth and so forth. Or like one of you, or maybe it was two of you, wrote, as the tool was very minimal, it gave us a lot of freedom to take the conversation wherever we wished. Exactly. That's what we were hoping for. And kind of, we did kind of mention this 2 weeks ago, but that was actually the point. Don't focus on the tool. This is not like a school exercise where you need to have the right answers. No, this is a tool that pops up conversations. And it shows you like, hey, this is actually very difficult. I cannot describe my organization like this. Why is it like that? Why is it so difficult for me to describe to this other person these different contextual layers? Now that's interesting. That's probably where the real world challenges are. And that's kind of the point of this exercise. Spoiler note, pretty much the point of all the other exercises come. What are the conversations that pop up? Where are the limitations of the tools? So I'm kind of hoping and looking, having went through and looked at the answers, the lessons learned from exercise 1. Remember, the onion is a simplification. Of course it is a simplification. That's the point. Now, when you need to simplify things, and in this case you were, telling the other person about your work context, you need to leave something out. You need to make a decision that this is important, I will tell this. This is not important, I will leave this out. Okay, you need to then understand, what do I leave out and what do I keep in my onion? So you actually need to have some kind of focus. You need to have some kind of prioritization. What's the rationale for me leaving things in and out? I include this, exclude this. Which brings us to the last point, which popped up really nicely in the criticism about the tool, was that if you don't know why you're doing this, if you're not a change agent at the moment, which is perfectly fine, then you're kind of like, why am I doing this? What's the point of me trying to figure out the other person's context and so forth? It's just kind of looking in other ways that it pops up these really good questions. As a change agent, change leader, what is your agenda? Why are you doing this change? What is the change you're doing? What's the impact you're aiming for? Why are you drawing the onion? Why do you need to understand the context? Once you have these answers, then you can it becomes easier to make those simplifications because you're actually clarifying some kind of message, some kind of a point, some kind of a context. What's your agenda? What is the impact you're aiming for? Why are you drawing the onion? Why do you use this specific tool? What's actually the change that you are facilitating? Well, of course, we didn't ask you to answer those questions yet. So don't worry if you didn't answer those questions. But the point of the exercise was that you do this simple exercise, and like many of you did, it kind of surfaces these higher level comments of what's actually going on. What's this change all about, and so forth. Couple of examples still. I think this was a good one because many of you are university students. So you maybe did something like this. You're in the middle, the exercise 1, that's the first layer, this course is the second layer, and then you're getting your master's degree is the next layer. And then you drew this and you're kind of like somebody here wrote that, this probably works better for a work-related setting, which is exactly true. You probably need to be in an organization for this tool to make sense. And you as a university student, you're kind of not an employer in an organization. You're much more, an individual going all alone in your studies. And that popped up, which was great. That was the point. So maybe one of you had an organization. Let's say that you would describe your role in this course. There's you, the next level is you and your pair, the next level is all the course participants, and the next level is everybody at the course. This is an organization, yes, but there's actually no change agenda. There's, nothing that you're driving towards. So in other words, to look at this tool, it works really well if you have an organization and you have a change agenda. You have some reason to change. You have a why, which if you flip it around, and use this tool and you kind of feel like, this tool is not working, it means, or you could actually should be kind of all your sensors open. It's a very powerful tool in helping you to see that maybe there is no clear organization. If this becomes really difficult for you or it doesn't make sense, then maybe that's actually telling you something that, we don't have a really clear organization here. Do we need one? That's a good question. And if, of course, it's kind of a test whether you have an agenda. And if you felt in this exercise that, I don't know why I'm doing this, then perhaps that's just a way of saying that, hey, in this context, in this project, you don't have a change agenda, So again, this tool, if it doesn't work, it tells you a lot. And if it works, it tells you a lot again. But it's not the tool that gives you answers. It is your reflections and it is the conversations that you're having. Here we go. So what is the organization? And if you think about this project that we asked you to do, what's the organization? Is it clear? How do you describe it to other people? What's the role your pair has in it? How do they describe their role? What are their part? And then the one about what's the actual desired impact? What's the why? What's the change agenda? What are they trying to achieve? And how clear is that? And we will return to this. This week's exercise will continue into this as well. Hey, I saw a question. There's a question. Are the layers people and positions, or can it be actions as well? Well, in this, it's kind of keeping it open, but the point is that these are more like static. You could call them like departments or teams or business units, which are people, aren't they? They're groups of people in an organization structure. So in a way, to answer simply, this is an organization structure, but not your classical boxes and arrows, but rather just showing the kind of the layers that I am as an individual, I'm part of this group, which is part of this group, which is part of this group. So that's the quick answer to that. Good. Well, this is pretty much saying the same thing, that if you felt that this was a silly exercise, too simple exercise, maybe if you think that this is some kind magically produces you the answers, no, it doesn't. It just helps you to facilitate that you have the answers that you come with. Good. Then let's move on to this week's topic, which is organizational transformation. A few reminders from previous lectures. Remember, Jari talked about taking a step back, being aware of the lenses of our organizational reality. There are multiple realities. Still, you really cannot say which one is the right one, that this is the correct answer and this is how our organization is. This is Jari's slide about, different lenses that we can have about exactly the same organization. So just to remind you from 2 weeks, there's no single truth about your organization. You just have different contexts and you have different lenses. And there's more than a few. Somebody could say there's infinite number of organizations, organizational realities, because, things change. So in other words, what is actually an organization? So today's topic is transforming an organization. And just before doing anything, I think we need to kind of pay some respect to the complexity of what an organization actually is. So is an organization, is it something that you can objectively measure, analyze, and understand from the outside? Or is it something like Jari talked last time, socially constructed and only maintained through our shared actions and shared meanings? Or maybe it's both. And what is organization? Is it language? Is it the boxes and the arrows between them? Or is it the processes? Is it the kind of the temporal things that go in time, projects, programs, activities? Or is it people's habits, practice, routines, all of that? Or is it actually the relationships between these? Relationship between people, networks, ecosystems, the connections between people, buildings, IT systems. Maybe it's the stories, maybe it's the narratives. This is our mission. This is how we have done. This is where our organization comes from. This is what we want to do. Or maybe the organization is the whole IT systems, because that's, those are the things we work with, the CRMs, the ERPs, the web pages. Is that what the organization really is about? And then, of course, like we talked 2 weeks ago, from whose point of view? What point of time? In what context? So the key question is this one in the bottom. If and when you start to change an organization, what will you change? Will you change the language? Will you change the groups, the units? Will you change people's practices? Will you change the IT systems? Will you change the narratives? That's quite popular nowadays. Let's change the mission of our organization. Well, that's a narrative, isn't it? That's kind of a story. This is what we're trying to do. We're, trying to make a more sustainable planet. Now that's a narrative. And you can see that if we change this, it can be very, very powerful in changing the organization. But however, it is a complex thing, but this shouldn't, of course, paralyze us at all. We can still be calm, we can still be rational and analytical about it. But the main point about this complexity now and 2 weeks ago was that just don't think that there's a single answer. Do not make the mistake that you try to find this one right answer, or to say it in fancily, that you can fully explain an organization in terms of its static parts and their interactions. No, it's way too complex. However, we should and we can simplify and reduce, just like we forced you to do in the exercise last week. The world is too complex. Like many of you said, this tool doesn't work. The world is too complex. However, we need to make simplifications, because otherwise we cannot make decisions. There's always complexity there. We can always go, well, I haven't looked at it from this perspective. Well, we haven't really taken that into account. And you never, ever make decisions. So mostly we need to make decisions. And when we make decisions, the more we are aware of the lenses and the context, what we leave out, I would say, better decisions we're making. Which brings us back to clarify ourselves. What is our focus? Where do we focus? What do we leave out? And why are we doing this? Then at least we know that we're leaving out millions and millions of different perspectives. And we're clarifying into this because of this, this, and this, because we're trying to achieve this and this. And that's decision making. And that's leadership. And that's how change happens. Great. So what does an organizational transform look like? From whom and what lenses? Kind of give a little bit examples, leave a couple of lenses of what it might look like, just to give you an idea and help you kind of build those own perspectives in your case. So just an example of what different lenses. Let's use the onion again. You can look at an organization. So for example, take an employer, your current employer, for example, or if you're not employed, then some previous employer. You could have an outsider perspective of that organization. Then there's probably the top management has a different perspective. Middle management typically has a very different perspective. Then there's kind of team leaders, and then, there's the individual kind of grassroots person working there, and they have different perspectives. So first example I'm giving here is kind of how do you transform a company culture kind of outside perspective? So if you're not in there, but kind of more like an analytical and looking at many, many different companies. And remember 2 weeks ago, we had this kind of simplification again about that a lot of organizations are looking into this new type of organizational culture, this anti-Tayloristic vision, responsive, agile, lean culture. And kind of the main principles are that the grassroots, the experts take responsibility. They have the power to make the decisions. They have transparent knowledge so they can make good decisions. And there's more focus on the end result and so forth. Now, putting this into many years ago, when I was working as a management consultant with a lot of people who had done actually company transformations here in the Nordics, we kind of applied this maturity model from kind of how change happens in society. Just very simple model, but it really, really works well when we look at organizational transformations from the outside. So this is the simple model. So you typically in an organization, you have these pioneers, people who want to do things differently, who think differently, and so forth. And they're mostly enthusiastic. They want to change things. They want to make things better in the organization, better customer value or better workplace and so forth. And they talk in new ways and do things very different. And then kind of there's a jump into this next level that you can identify is that then these people actually get together, kind of unofficially. They maybe start doing things. Maybe they just start exchanging information, tools, and sharing information. And top management starts acknowledging this. And we call this kind of these pockets of change. So it's not just individuals anymore, but you can see, hey, there's something going there, and there's things going in the organization. And then when top management has recognized this, kind of, the big wheel of change gets starting. It goes like, hey, this is exactly what we're looking for. This is, let's align this with our vision and strategy, and, let's start a change program. Let's, assign a leader into this and allocate resources and have a vision of it. And, the big wheel starts turning that we're actually going to change the whole company culture. And then somewhere there is the kind of the new normal. There's this idea that the step number 4 is that we have this new company culture and everything is great and fantastic. And just to give you an example of typical things that, you can do as an organization's leader, in the disconnected pioneers, you can kind of activate them, tell them that this is great, can I help you in this, recognize their work. Pockets of change, you need to start, the grassroots needs to start talking to the top management that, hey, we would like to do these things, can we have these changes, let's define a vision of this change and so forth. And the big one there in the bottom is the culture survey, which you typically do is that you just, what about everybody in this organization? We have these active people who are maybe, 5% of the company. What about the rest of the 95? What do they think? Are these just a loud minority? And then, of course, designing a change program is something that has been done for decades. So it is designing the whole program and pilots and scaling up. So as an example, I give you the Finnish broadcasting company Yle. Here I was actually an outside observer. I wasn't working there or didn't work with them either, at least on this change. But I worked on other things with the people who were driving this change. And in Yle, the story went like this. So already over 10 years ago, they started building their streaming capabilities. For all the ones who live in Finland know that's Yle Areena is the name. So it was a streaming platform, which meant they had to bring new people in, IT experts and UX designers and all those people. And they had different ways of working, and they were very enthusiastic about it. And what gradually happened when they brought these new people to build this new capability, the Yle Areena streaming capability, these people started connecting, going like, hey, we need to have these product owner trainings, these, agile skill trainings and all this. They started making events and get-togethers, and you suddenly kind of get these emergent leaders. Somebody would go, hey, what is this about? Well, go and ask that person. And then that person kind of becomes an informal leader of this change. Now, what happened next in the case of Yle was that there was actually a company culture crisis. This is many years ago, 6 years ago, can't remember, maybe some of you can. But it had nothing to do with the company kind of working culture. This was a journalistic crisis. And this crisis was that there was this kind of whether the Prime Minister of Finland was telling the broadcasting company what news to report or how, it was a scandal. And the CEO had to resign. And now the whole board was kind of hiring a new CEO. And now that, these pocket of change pioneers saw an opportunity that, hey, what if we bring these things into the recruitment of the new CEO. Long story short, they did recruit the new CEO, Merja Ylä-Anttila, and definitely, her leadership was the kind of new type of leadership, and was really the kind of person to change the company culture into the things that the grassroots had worked already for many years. So there was a top-level change, and there became a change program, and it was called Yle, and they reached the new norm. So for them, it kind of became this, they actually changed things. It was called their Yle Ketterä, Yle Agile in English, and they more or less to a certain degree reached a lot of organizational transformation. Now, the interesting thing in this was that once the people who had been driving this change, the change leaders, the change agents, they were really happy, but they were kind of like, what do we do now? That we have this amazing culture, but what do we do with this culture? It's kind of like you build let's say you build a really new bicycle that is fancy and all the things you wanted, and then the question is, where do I ride with this bicycle? But fortunately for them, this is at least what it looked like for me as an outsider. The thing was that they at the same time had done a lot of strategy work, and they had this kind of strategy driver of creating the digital customer experience. So it became that the whole culture was then a tool or a mechanism to create the best kind of digital customer experience. But also the last point, for all the employees, this was a really good the culture was a really good tool to create a meaningful workplace, to really underline and understand the value of the broadcasting company for society. And all of you who know Yle a little bit can definitely see that it is a company that has its in very core social impacts and having value in society. And by the way, there in the bottom, I had a master's thesis worker who actually documented this. That's why I kind of know about this as well, that she went and interviewed a lot of people and how did this actually transformation go. So if you're interested, have a look at that master thesis, or if you're doing a similar master's thesis, that's a good example back from 2020. Also, this doesn't necessarily mean that it always happens. So here's an example where I was also involved, where things didn't happen. Very similarly, I will not say the name of the organization, but the point being that new people came in, digitalization came in, new product development, new business development brought new people, and these people again started organizing for change and started organizing for ways of working differently. And I was there as a coach, coaching these new teams and their acceleration programs of how do they create new businesses and new products. And there was no big wheel of change. There was a small wheel of change. And I still, of course, don't know exactly what was the decisions made up in top level, but it was obvious that there was not enough commitment, not enough resources, not a big, change program, and then kind of nothing happened. So there was kind of this build up and people got really excited, but then there was the classical, top management support wasn't enough, and then it kind of failed and people went back to the normal way of doing things. Now, the interesting thing about this was that actually a couple of years after this has happened, I found myself again at the exactly same company, even with some of the same people I had met a couple of years ago, going like, this is a bit of a deja vu. We're here again. We have enthusiastic people. We're building these pockets of change. So maybe this time the change will happen. And if I look at this company now in hindsight, I think it has changed quite a lot into more digital, more customer-centric, and more agile, large Finnish corporation. So maybe they were a bit too early in the first time. Who knows? Maybe sometimes these things just, take a couple of iterations, even organizational transformations. I guess that's the lesson learned in this story. The main point for these two examples is that the company culture changes, even if there is no official change program, because new people come in and, they can change things. And you think about the onions again, you can change your own way of working, you can change your team, you can maybe change the next level of working. So change is happening all of the time. question is just, how much is it controlled or directed? But the other point is, it's not like linear or gradual change. Typically, transformations happen in these kind of leaps, these big jumps, discrete jumps. Good, just checking the time here. One more thing about I've learned doing a lot of these organizational changes, that there is this kind of populism aspect into it, on how people talk about these things. And this goes back to the thing I talk about, narratives, and especially about communication, but a lot about people not necessarily understanding the bigger context. And I call this kind of like the old bosses don't get it narrative. And what I mean by this is that, people who are enthusiastic and, have learned new ways of doing or come from a different domain are kind of like, oh, why do you still have this old company culture? And you're such a, stiff and bureaucratic organization. Don't the bosses just get it? You need to change. So it maybe looks like something like this. So here in this simplification, the red people, these are the enthusiastic pioneers, the UX designers and the service designers and the agile software architects and new business developers. And they go like, oh, we don't need bosses anymore. We need more autonomy, and grassroots has to have more decision power, and old men in suits are dumb. They don't get it. This is the AI digital era and so forth. And then the boss person here, as the black, is kind of like, huh, what's going on? And I have actually a couple of questions to you. And maybe the boss or the bosses have questions such like this. What are you actually talking about? Are you talking about individual projects, organizational capabilities, ways of working, our R&D functionality? If we're going to change, how does this change as an investment fit into the portfolio of all the investments we have in this corporation? How do you, by the way, coordinate among yourselves? How are you organized? Do you have leaders? And, how do you do that? Then I think a classical one is, I hear you. You are the new, data analysis, generative AI specialists, but you are only 1% of this company's personnel. Have you talked with the 90% of the company personnel? Do they agree with you? And so forth. And what does this mean in practice? Let's say it's a large, big international corporation. Kind of the boss gets it, but how do you do this in such a large corporation? How does it, what about our offices in China? What about our offices in South America? What about, our offices in South Africa? How does it affect them? So, of course, these are the kind of typical questions that, unless you have been running a large corporation, you probably don't have answers for. And if all goes badly, you might end up in a situation that all the enthusiastic pioneers are like, oh, the bosses are stupid, they don't get it. And then all the bosses are kind of like, okay, these people actually have no clue of how to run our business. They are enthusiastic, yes. Would I let them drive this car? Probably not. And that's kind of where we get this. I had been having, at least for a decade, this kind of, I would say, speaking different languages. That there is still this thing, we need a revolution. Let's kick out the old men in suits, which might have a good point in it. But then again, the boss is going like, oh, this new culture, that's not really for us. That's, I will not look into this lean, agile design, autonomy, responsiveness. These people, they have no idea how to run a multinational corporation, for example. My point is, what brought us here? Why there is definitely kind of this, how should I say, polarization and separation of two different perspectives. And I say that all the fantastic agile thinking and lean thinking and design thinking are partly to blame. Because if you look at any of these lean or especially, agile development, design thinking, their history is not running organizations. They are definitely project level, product development philosophies. They are not meant for running organizations, or especially how you transform organizations. So I think that's really, really important to know, because these are, again, these are the philosophies, these are the schools of thought that are at the forefront of changing organizations. But if you look at them carefully, they have never, ever been designed how you actually run organizations. They're designed, how do you create successful businesses and products? Good. And that's actually what has been going on in the past, I would say, 5 years in the discourses and conversations about, because that's the 4 point. I think that collectively, at least in the literature, has been this kind of awakening that, hey, we need to change, but we need to have a vision of what kind of organization structure we want. It's not enough just to change the structures, change the organization. We need a vision of what is the organization architecture that we want to be. What kind of, boxes and arrows we want, because we cannot have chaos. And there's actually a lot of readings. I put a couple of ones here just to given that this is, how do you democratize transformation? How do you build agile cultures that scale up, and how do you actually change corporate cultures and so forth? So check them out. Those are all Harvard Business Review articles. So I think they're a good example of what other things going on in the past years. Okay, a couple of minutes to go. Let me check where we are at. Yes, one more thing is this. So this actually comes up back to a couple of comments you had about the first exercise. The question is, if you really could design an organization from scratch, would you start inside out? If you were given the opportunity to take, let's say Alba University and totally redesign a new university, would you take the existing organization and try to change it inside out? No, you wouldn't. No. You would actually do it in a way that few of you commented that, hey, the onion should be drawn from top to bottom, from outside in. Of course, if you have the opportunity to redesign an organization from scratch, you would start by designing what's its purpose, who are its customers, what are the markets, and what's the business domain. So kind of the outermost layer of the onion would be your starting point. And this is, of course, what startups do. So the startup I'm familiar with, Twice Commerce, their story, for example, can be applied to any new organization. Actually, even before step number 1, what are the markets and what's the advantage? There's step number 0. Why do we do this? So the 3 people who founded this company, they had to sit down and think, why do we do this? What's our founding vision? We could do something else, but we're making a decision to found a company. So why are we doing this? And once they had that, then they kind of started outside in. What differentiates us in the market? Because this is our unique advantage, how do we organize ourselves? If we organize ourselves like this, how do we make decisions? How do we lead people? If this is how we make decisions, how do we then split into teams? How do these teams work and how do they function? And finally, all the way to the individual at the core, what kind of individuals want to recruit, what kind of competencies, what kind of talent, and how would we like that person to behave? What kind of, cultural characteristics we want. So large organizations, of course, don't have the luxury to start from scratch. They already exist. And that's why typically you see change leadership happening inside out, because you already have 50, 500, 50,000 people working in the organization. But actually the way you should think about it is outside in, just like many of you commented about the onion exercise. Good. Right on time. Let's have a 5-minute break. Bank here in Finland, who's doing it right now. Well, the fast answer is we're going to get back to that later. And the answer is, of course, it means what it means in that particular organization. It's such a broad word that there's not one single answer. And everything I talked about before the break should probably also underline that there should not be a single answer, because everything is contextual and we have different lenses and so on. But we're going to get back to that in the later lectures, kind of what does it mean, and you know, all about that. Attendance coming soon, don't worry. Let's continue. I promised you another lens. So this is another one which is kind of top management perspective, or you could say this is more like a management consultant perspective, because this is definitely what a management consultant would tell top management leaders, directors and vice presidents and all of them, CEOs, that how do you actually transform a company culture. And kind of this is a work I did again based on partly a lot of what we had my colleagues who were experts in this, and also kind of putting into some, you know, literature and supporting all of this. But it's not like there's, again, a magic formula, because it all depends on the organization. But you can definitely, kind of answering, Paula, your question as well, there are definitely things in running a change that you should look into and ask questions. The details, they always depend on the organization and what it's doing. So here's a list of kind of 6 steps that you should, you know, ask and take into consideration. So let's go through them. And then after that, your breakout room exercise where you can chat and talk about and kind of dissect all of these. Good. So first step before anything starts is that, is there a top level desire for change? Does the top leadership want to change? If they don't want to change, then why bother? And I put these kind of, you know, phrases here. You, as let's say that if the person is working for the organization and the leadership is saying that we're having a change, that then the grassroots might have a question. You want me to change? Are you ready to change yourself? So typically the questions for top leadership, whether they want to change, are something like this. Learning and experiments, are they considered an investment or a cost? Because if we want things to change, then you need to invest in learning, you need to invest in people trying out new things, which is very closely related to failure. So what's the relationship towards failure? You know, if people try new ways of working, try new, you know, tools and business models, they will probably fail because they're trying new. So what's, you know, how much risk they take? Do you award, you know, risk taking and so forth? How easy it's to give away decision making and all of these basic questions. And lastly, are the leaders personally ready to try out things, to show things, that, you know, experiment and fail? Now, if that's all set, that the leaders are kind of, yes, we are committed, yes, we agree, we want to change, then, yeah, basic stuff. You need a strategy and a vision to people to follow. In other words, you want me to change? Change to what? Give me an idea. You know, change for in itself is give me something tangible, give me a strategy. And typically, again, these are kind of school book examples. How is the industry changing and by whom? You know, how is our competition changing? How is our domain changing? How are our customers changing? You know, can you spell them out? Can you describe to everybody these? What's our organization's unique competence in all of this? And what's our take on it? Are we going to be shaping the market, or are we going to be adapting it kind of, you know, a little bit behind the others? What will be in our strategy and what will we leave out? What's the focus? What's the prioritization? Good. Step number 2. Step number 3, sorry about that. Supportive structures. So yes, now leaders want to change. You have a strategy and you have a vision. This is what we want to be. So kind of just like the scaffolding in the picture, how are you going to support this change? Because just like building a new building, you probably need scaffolding before it's ready. So in organizations, the question is, how will you support the change? Things like, what are going to be our decision-making principles? How do we set goals and objectives? Something like OKRs. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with them and probably using them in your work. So what organization structures we want so that the culture will become the one that we want? What structures we keep, what structures we change, what structures we take away? How do we measure success? What's our, KPIs? What's our success for all those finite projects, the kind of projects that we know will end? And what's the measure of success for all the infinite projects? And by infinite projects, I mean something like customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction will never, ever end. You will need to measure customer satisfaction as long as the company exists. So it's not like a temporal project. So what kind of metrics we have there? And then, of course, we probably have some projects that are finite and have clear metrics. How do we know? All the supports like governance models, portfolio structures, all of those support the new kind of culture, such as experimentation or so forth. And then, number one, leadership wants to change. Number two, strategy and vision. Number three, support structures. 4, can we do it? Do we have the capabilities and the competencies to do it? So you want me to change? Do I, as an individual, have to change? Do I need to learn new skills? Do I need to learn new capabilities and talent? So questions like this, capabilities is not only about people, it is all the systems and, physical structures and all of those things, contracts that already exist. So which ones we've got to work with and which one we're going to renew. Recruitment is most probably very critical in any organizational change. What kind of new people we're going to recruit? Or are we going to recruit anybody? Or are we going to just retrain, not just, but are we going to retrain our existing peoples? How are we going to change people's capabilities and all this? And how mature are our, let's say, design or agile development or data analytics or AI capabilities at the moment? Are they okay, or do we need to develop them and so on? So those are the questions. But, number 4, can we do this? Most probably, there's a huge training and education change in changing the capabilities. Then number 5. So we got all the 4 covered. Then the 5th one is, where do you start? So what are the spearheads, pilots, and ambassadors? So again, question, you want me to change? Dear boss, you want me to change? So what's the first step? Where do we start? And the reason I have this picture of penguins is that there is this, I think it's an American English expression, the first penguin. And as far as I know, the penguins behave so that they are on a, on a ledge of ice just like that. And there's fish in the ocean, but they don't know if there is a killer whale waiting for them to eat them. So it might be dangerous, but they're hungry. So the story goes that, eventually there is a first penguin. One penguin that jumps into the water, who's maybe too hungry. And then all the rest of the penguins look whether the killer whale will eat that penguin. If there's no killer whale, then everybody will follow and they will eat the fish. Hence the expression first penguin. That's why the picture. In practice, it means how well the teams have adapted new ways of working. Maybe it's design thinking, maybe it's agile, development, lean startups, and so forth. Where do you start? What are the spearheads? What are the very first initiatives that will start doing the new kind of organizational culture? And how will you support these individuals? How long? If you're asking somebody to, hey, there is this project you're working on, and now we're giving you these new tools and new ways of working. How long will this succeed? How will this change their career paths? Will it? And are you reaching outside, outside the organizations, ecosystems and so forth? And last, how will you communicate all of this? Let's say that there's 1,000 people working in the organization, and then 10 people. They're the penguins. They can do things differently. How are you going to communicate this to the rest 990 people? So these are actually very practical questions that need to be answered. And last, but definitely not least, is that, okay, now you have kind of all set up. You have started your very first spearhead projects, but how are you going to scale up? What happens next? So again, dear boss, you want me to change. You just told me what's step number 1, or what's step number 2, 3, 4. How do we move on from here? So in all simplicity, the questions, how will top management communicate the results, the success? How are they going to communicate? Why are we doing this? How do you gather learnings from those first penguins? Because they are the ones who are actually doing new things in the existing company culture. And they're super valuable because they learn so much, mostly by banging their head against walls, but that's a learning nevertheless. Have you made sure that this change process, this change program is high enough, even in the board's agenda, they're on top of this? And then last but not least, have you done the basic things? Do you have clear goals, clear metrics, success criteria for the change program itself? It is a program, it is a project, so are you running it in a good way? It's like that. Good. So those are the 6 steps. So the question is to you, actually, and Annika, if you're ready soon, then what is probably difficult in implementing these? So if here on the right-hand side, we have the change leaders checklist. So let's think that you are in a leadership position, and I just gave you kind of checklist of 6 items. Do you have the top level desire? Do you have a strategy? Do you have the supportive structures, capabilities and competencies, spearheads, and plan to scale up? So what's probably difficult in actually implementing these? Or the other 6 questions that if you are the person to be changed, if the change leader is telling you all of this, then the questions towards the leader are, leader, boss person, are you ready to change? What do you want us to change to? How will you support that? Do I need to become something new? Do I need to learn new skills? What's the first step? Or what are the next steps after that? So now we're going to put you into groups. So for each one, think about, you have probably, even if you're a young student, you have probably been in some kind of a change context that somebody has wanted you to change. I would guess studies are one of them, but nevertheless. So just, thinking aloud in the group, what probably makes difficult to change and so forth, and, give examples from your own experiences. And then again, choose one of you to be the scribe, and then just, for each team, just one person can list all of the, bullet points into the chat, the things that you talked about, things that popped up. Okay. Let's have it for 10 minutes.
Yes, just opening all the rooms.
Fantastic. And whenever you are ready, and let's put it there. All is measured in years. And so of course you understand the larger the organization, then the slower it takes, kind of as a rule of thumb. But we're changing organization cultures, then that probably takes a couple of years for things to actually happen. So the broadcasting company example, I think, like I said, it started over 10 years ago. So you could kind of depends where do you measure it, but roughly took a decade. It's not a quick fix. Let's see what else. Sometimes change comes from hype. A lot of money is invested in change. Getting a shared understanding, having proper risk management is very important. Good. Having a shared understanding, that's a brilliant point. Depending on how people are involved in the process, there can be challenges with sharing understanding, vision, and meaning. Yes, excellent point as well. So again, the more people you have, the more work is required to make everybody heard, because you need to have people heard so that they're committed into a shared understanding. We'll get back to this later in this course. That's one of the key themes of this course, is to how do you build shared meanings and ways of doing that. Let's see what else. Benefits of the change were unclear. That's a very good and very simple. And I'm hoping you're kind of looking at some of these answers in the chat as well. The more I work with this change leadership and changing transformations, the more it is that these are very, very simple things. This is not like some very sophisticated, quantum physics that you need to learn. The basics are very simple, such as this point that was here, that, the benefits of the change were unclear. But somehow the quantum physics difficulty comes that how on earth people then don't make them clear? Why is it so difficult to, even to have a couple of these basics? Just like the 6 steps I did there, it's like they are easy to understand that these are the 6 steps, but somehow it's very difficult to make them into reality. That's where it becomes difficult. That's why, change leadership is a very challenging profession and practice and topic. Let's see what else. Jari, if you want to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, very, very good stuff. All in all, I think this patience is one thing which is quite often pretty much lacking. That and quite often top management is really rushing to the next thing already, and there is no time and tolerance to give time to that the change will go and be routinized enough. And I think that's then we are losing the tipping point and get back to the old habits easily. So that's one thing that was mentioned.
Yeah, I highlighted here also at room 6 had this comment that often change management models assume people to be rational, even though this is a false in reality.
Yeah.
People are feeling, and I guess that everybody here who has been involved in any change is that it's actually more about emotions than rationality. And
actually, I can mention here also that I just have one master thesis which is investigating the different level of managers within the change. So it's also that all the managers, they are not really for the change quite clearly, because they are also having different feelings and different maybe worries about their own position and so on. So that feeling thing is very important. And quite often we talk about the resistance in grassroots level, but I think there is a different people are all over the hierarchy as well, and I have
absolutely. And to add on to that, because it is that typically if you change it, in a workplace, especially as I would say all of us here are highly educated professionals, and the division between our personal identity and our work identity becomes blurred. And so and then when people want to change our workplace, our culture, our way of doing, it becomes goes under the skin very fast. It becomes like, what do you mean? Do I need to change my identity? And then, of course, that becomes very emotional and very personal. Because I would say in a different context, in a different kind of job, people would be like, oh, okay, so you want me, this morning you wanted me to do that, tomorrow you want me to do that. Fine, you're paying the salary. But, in a highly trained and the kind of jobs that all of us here are, we are much more emotionally invested in the job. And that's why it is emotion. Yeah.
But all in all, folks, I think this is a very high quality response, and maybe the best so far in this course. And so
Yeah.
we're lucky to how active you have been just in 10 minutes. I mean, that's great. Great stuff.
Copy paste this into the chat GPT and ask it to summarize us, and then we'll
Yeah.
have a one slider with all of your wisdom in it. Yeah, I'm just giving, we're strangely, we're not in a hurry, so I'm spending more time here. Yeah, a couple of good points. Just leadership always underestimate how much time and resources is required. Is another way of saying the patience that you, Jari, underlined.
Yeah, and to remind everyone about the attendance, I'll post the attendance link again so that everyone remembers to submit their attendance. Yep.
Good. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, let's take this one. If there are different cultures of communication and collaboration in different departments or organizations, who should take the initiative to change? If a research-oriented university merges with a practice-oriented university, and there's a joint project between hard and soft sciences, how would the relevant actors involved should take the initiative to change? Yeah, that's a good example. And it, this company, we have, there are mergers and acquisitions, and companies and different cultures come and they need to work together. So who's responsible? Well, I think the simple answer is that who is responsible is the one who is responsible. I mean, if there's a project, then who's the project owner? If there's a new business unit that is a merge of two, who's the boss of the business unit? And if there is no clear that who's responsible, that's a problem. That obviously is a problem. Jari, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's always the joint boss, and coming back to this example of different universities to merge, I think it's well, difficult issue, because it's about the hegemony in a way. So what is the idea of the new unit, new institution? But anyway, I think it's again, this to summarize that this individual level feelings and fears are quite often neglected and not taken seriously, and we focus on structures and so on quite a bit, but having a balance between these two is also quite essential.
And then just the basic is that, let's say that you have two groups working together, just to explain that, why are you working together?
Yeah.
just to make sure that, if there are 5 + 5 people, then you talk with the 10 people. That does everybody understand? What are your concerns? Is it clear why we are merging? What's the point of the merge? If you just assume that everybody knows it, then you're wrong. But I have a couple of list of typical, roadblocks that I call things that make these things difficult. And like Jari said, those are really an awesome answers over there. And I mean, there was somebody asking for the notes, but if you want the chats, then we're going to save them anyway, and we can put them for you to copy paste to ChatGPT as well. One of the things that is kind of a classical is that you have this supporting structure called governance or PMO office. A PMO office typically in a large organization, that's the office where, takes care of what are our project model, templates, what are the processes of starting a new initiative, and, that kind of a governance organization. Of course, these are the pipes and the plumbing. So if these pipes and plumbing don't let you work in a new way, then it's going to be difficult. The second point is valuation models. And by valuation models, I mean that at the end of the day, whatever you're doing, somebody makes an estimate, is it worth doing? Whether it's research that is not, not a business, or whether it is pure business, somebody needs to make a valuation that is it worth investing our time and energy into doing this? And now the valuation model, anybody who has, worked in a startup probably knows this really well, is just simply that what's the model of how people in the organization count, the potential value of doing this? And this is a science of its own, of course, different kind of calculations, and you can bring a lot of math into this, and then to make a decision that we should do this and we should not do this because this seems to, bring this much more value than this. But you understand that whatever is the model of estimating the value becomes a key. And which is more same kind of saying, generally speaking, the decision making. What kind of process is the decision making? Do you have different like stage gate models of doing things? So very much got pipes and plumbing as operating structures. And yes, always about the money. And I'm not saying if it's good or bad, it is a fact. And how do you distribute that money is called, typically in a large organization, the budgeting cycles. So if you do budgeting once a year, then change happens. You got it once a year, because you're probably in a situation where you're telling, I would like to do this, can I get money? And once a year, somebody makes a decision and says, yes, I give you money to do that. Now, if you change that, then you need to wait for the next cycle. In all simplicity, that's how it goes. But of course, in more detail, it is the principles of budgeting. How do you distribute money? How do you make investments and all of that? And it becomes a matter of portfolio management. So larger the organization, it has a lot of initiatives, a lot of things that it needs to fund and investment. So how do people manage and value the items in the portfolio? Then on a more practical level that I'm sure that everybody can relate to easily is that if you want to change an organization culture, it probably requires a lot of discussions. A lot of people meeting and having a chat. It's kind of like, hey, Jari, did you understand? What does this change mean? What is this new vision about? Oh, okay. So you see, is this considered proper work? Is there time allocated for these valuable discussions and conversations? How are we organized physically so that we bump into each other? So that we meet people, those different two, like the example of two universities merging. Do they ever see each other, or are they still on the 50 kilometers away? How does it work? And then the last of these big roadblocks is this, that at a workplace, probably the individuals are very much driven kind of by the career models and the paths inside that organization. And now if you want to change the organization, especially its culture, you should change those career paths as well, because those are the ones that are actually, pushing people into certain directions. So typically it is that, like I said earlier, how is risk-taking awarded? What about if people fail? Are people, conservative and play it in the safe side? Or does their career progression or their, does it reward that this is a person who takes a lot of risk, which means that they fail most of the time, but when they succeed, it becomes much more valuable than the failures. So the main point for this kind of second lens and the second part after the break was this, that from the very top perspective, and remember my dinosaur picture with the bosses and the populists, it's good for everybody to understand this culture transformation is very holistic. It is big. It touches practically every aspect of a workplace, of an organization culture, and it takes time and patience, just like it was in the comments. This is not just an agile or lean project, that at least that, the world where I come from, the past 10 years when I was working with this, I had to deal quite a lot that people just thought that, why don't we just make things agile? Why don't we just make things design oriented? Well, it's a little bit more bigger than that, because it includes strategies, it includes, organization's capabilities, the whole kind of innovation portfolio, structures, governance models, and yes, of course, the people themselves who make the decisions. Nothing's going to take that basic human fact away, that the people who have decision-making power are the people who need to change as well if change is going to happen.
Yes, actually, this is something I would like to pinpoint as well, that top leaders, or change leaders, they have this kind of double challenge: how to lead change and how to change their own way of being and behaving as well, and seeing them as leaders within, not above. And quite often, this change leadership models think that those change leaders are already there, and they are, but they are within as well as a part of the system. And so that's very crucial point to focus as well.
Yeah. Okay. Exercise number 2. Let's have fun with all of this. So it's an onion. Well, we'll call it the temporal onion. I'll show you soon. Okay, deadline next Tuesday by noon, finish time. Then I have enough time to actually go over your answers and see what you answered, and pick a lot of those fantastic things. I hope I did justice to all the good answers you did last week. Okay, now we're gonna, again, super simple. And remember, it is simple because now the simplicity helps you probably hear or realize yourself that, okay, that's actually difficult. So long as we keep the tools super simple, we can focus on the stuff that is actually challenging. So this is all about the idea of before, during, and after. So a long story, here we go. Last week we had the onion. And the point of the onion is that you need to understand the context, because your own success is always defined by the outside layer. If you're a team member, then it is the team who more or less defines whether you're a successful team member. If your team is part of a business unit, then it's kind of the business unit's perspective that defines if your team is successful or not. That was the point. So the context onion was a great tool. However, it's a static tool. It's not, it doesn't imply change indirectly, but it does, but not directly. It's just, it's a snapshot of the context. So how do you draw it on a timeline? Kind of the idea that if we had the onion, the time is that some things come from here, then there is in the center is your project, and then after the project is done, it kind of contributes to the next level of the onion. So as an example, again, let's say your team gets a project. It gets a project from the business unit, then it does the project. When it's ready, the impact is into the next layer in the business unit, so to speak. So that's the whole idea. It comes from the bigger layer, and the impact happens outside your own thing in the same bigger layer. So your project, your work is never in a vacuum. You're always in a context, and a temporal context. And by temporal, I mean things come from somewhere. Things have happened before your project. And then after your project is done, it has an impact somewhere, which is outside your project. It is after your project. So again, your success is defined after your task is done, somewhere there. So it's again kind of this thinking that, hey, this is my area of responsibility. But if I want to do my job really well, I understand that something has happened before. And if I'm successful, the success will actually happen after I'm done. So let's see, how do you plan for a large context, keeping it simple? So let's say that there's a project of yours. It has a beginning, you understand the context, then you do the project, then it's done. It's defined by done, deadline, you run out of money, whatever. Now, if this is a way that you try to understand your project, it's a little bit limited. I would call it kind of navel-gazing small picture. You're just concerned about your project. You don't really care where it came from. You don't really care what's going to happen afterwards. You could call it a little bit selfish as well. Another way to think about it is that you actually draw a timeline that is much longer than your project. And then you start from the future. So you start by asking question, for example, what has happened 1 year after the project, if you would say that the project was successful? So again, rephrasing the same thing. Your project ended a year ago, and you're now 1 year afterwards going like, hey, that project was actually super successful, because now 1 year after the project, we can see this, this, and this. And this is what I call the desired impact, because the impact happens somewhere in the future after the project. And then we start going closer. So if that was 1 year, so what's the impact after 6 months after the project has ended? What's the impact after 1 month the project has ended? And that should help you define the end goals of the individual project. Asking the question, when this project ends, what do we need to have to reach the impact we want in 1 month? What do we need to have by the end of the project so that we can see something happening in 6 months or 12 months? So you kind of reverse engineer from the future to the end of the project. And same about the history, just understanding what's the history? Where do we come from? What has been done before? Has been in similar projects? Are there other projects that we need to know? What exists already? So before you start your project, there's probably just a simple question, what needs to be ready? What do we need to know before we start doing it? So now, actually, the planning, again, just like the context onion, we plan our work in the larger context of the impact we desire. Remember, the key word here is the impact. The impact happens after the project is done. And sometimes the impact might take quite a long time to manifest and become concrete. And that, of course, depends on the project as well. Sometimes, the project has results, but those results will not have an impact until some time has passed. I don't know. Very simple again. Maybe it sounds childish to you. Maybe it is obvious. Maybe this is not very scientific. Hey, remember, just like last time, the tool is intentionally super simple. It is trying to help you clarify the very simple basics that people tend to forget and overlook. And hey, don't focus on the tool. It is just a tool. So just like many of you did last time, pay attention to the process that the tool facilitates. So the process here again is that, yes, you get a pair, and the pair you're going to be asking the pair questions, and you're drawing the pair's temporal diagram. And now both of you, when you're doing this, kind of keep your eyes and ears and sensors open. What is difficult? Why does this tool doesn't fit reality? Is there something wrong with the tool, or is there something wrong with reality? What is easy? That was really easy to do. Why was it easy? Has somebody done something really well, or so forth? And so forth. It really helps you unsurface complex things, easy things, unclear things, and then you can start digging into the root causes. Why was this project not a success? Or why will this project not be a success? So again, here's the exercise. Draw the before and after picture of your pair's work, not your own work. Ask them what is their current project. It can be a current project, but it can be a past project as well. You're smart people. Choose a project that you think that will fit this exercise really well. Can be the same as last week. And then ask all the questions. Go back to the third slide before this one and ask the questions about the future and the impacts. Draw this before, during, after diagram of the other person's work. And then you switch roles. And again, same as last week, your drawing, you need to understand the other person's work. So ask, and all of that. And then remember to reflect together, bullet points or sentences, 3, 5, if you're really good, 10 kind of things that you thought that when you reflected on the whole process, the facilitation, the discussion, and the use of this tool. What did you learn? What was good? What was bad? What you didn't understand? And what didn't work? And all that. Return the drawings and the reflections by noon next Tuesday. Okay. Hey, that was lecture 2, but don't leave yet. Further readings, you get the slides. Bunch of stuff. You can imagine that there's a lot of things going on. Jari, you mentioned a master's thesis. These are some, there's probably new ones, as you can see, these are a little bit old, kind of what we have done, especially for those of you who are still our students who are probably thinking that, hey, maybe something like this would be a nice master thesis. Well, Jari and myself are the people who have, supervised these kind of theses a lot. So, ask us, and we have a lot of work that you can look into. Your checklist before you go, attendance form, it's been in the chat a couple of times. Those of you who need the attendance, go and check it out. Much appreciate the little feedback sentence you put there. It's always good. We will send the links again. Probably we're going to use Google Drive, and then Rosa and Annika will start matching the pairs for the exercise. Jari, anything else? Anybody else? Put in the chat any questions?
No, nothing special at this point.
It's a holiday here in Finland tomorrow.
The master thesis, actually, I have three now in progress. One is about what that transformation from startup to scale up organization, and that's interesting. What happens? How you really? What happens then when organization is growing, and what are the things that you should take into account? Another is creating measurements for this kind of a large scale corporation transformation. So how we can measure the transformation process itself, what are the criteria, which was already asked in chat. And so that's very interesting how we can follow up that. And then one was this leaders within the chains. And so, but they are still in progress. So but next year they can be in list.
Okay, people are going, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Official end now. And